All right. Good morning, PT on Ice crowd. Happy Monday. It is Monday with Pop. We are into December, which is pretty amazing. Here in New Jersey, it's 50 degrees outside. I don't know, craziness always. There's never a dull moment. I think it's going to be cold tomorrow. So today I want to dive into optimization. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot, and I thought it would be a good one to kind of poke at a little bit. Before I do, just want to make sure that I'm kind of hitting on all the high points. We're getting into December now, and I think there's a couple of things that it's worth keeping an eye on. One, I know that there was a nice little uptick in people who were given gift cards for the Ice Physio family. I would tell you to keep an eye on that. I think it's a great gift. I certainly have seen it in our course. People who have kind of traded ideas and nudged people in the right direction and said, hey, this course is for you. So that's a nice way to do it, and I would just tell you to keep an eye on that as well. Hey, Jason, welcome. I know there's a whole ton of courses that are always on the fly. I'm not going to recite them all for you. Just want you to make sure you take a look. If you haven't been to the website in a bit, take a look there and make sure that you're kind of catching everything that's been going on and what's coming down the pike. I know I saw that Justin was going to be, Dunaway was going to be in New Jersey, so I'm excited for that. That's kind of cool. And I know the rest of the team is everywhere. So I won't go into too much more detail about that. Just kind of redirect, and if you haven't been there in a bit, take a look. There's some cool things coming down the pike. And I'll wrap up at the end a little bit with what we're doing on the Pop Health front and kind of what you can prepare for going forward. So I want to start the clock and get rolling. So, the basis of today is the idea of optimization and whether or not that's a good thing entirely. And, I'm a systems guy in many ways. And so systems, of course, naturally, the progression for most systems is you sort of build it and then you kind of test it and then you make sure that it does what it's doing. And then you spend most of your time optimizing, right? So you actually put a decent amount of time into, continually kind of prodding it and poking it and making it better. And sort of laying down, ways of kind of getting it to do more. So that's your classic kind of mechanical system thinking. And it's really important. I think it's kind of a foundation that if we're going to move into the future on the healthcare side, we're going to have to get used to it. We're going to have to get good at it even. Not just sort of tolerate it, but actually start thinking that way. And there's a lot of factors that play into it. I mean, one of the most important factors is just this idea of interrelatedness, the fact that not everything is linear and not everything is kind of like, well, if I do this, this input creates that output, but more like this input and the 5 other inputs that I don't even know exist today or haven't really thought about all interface with each other to create a different output. That changes things. It adds a lot of complexity, and I know we've talked about that in the past. And so if you think of it, and you can dive into this, and I'm not going to go too deep into it because I feel like there's no way you can do it justice in 15 minutes. But systems thinking, or what sometimes is called emergent systems thinking, there's a lot out there, and you should definitely understand it. So that basis, right, this idea that we have to have systems that can produce consistent outputs in a complex, messy world is kind of fundamental to where I think the world wants to go, and certainly where healthcare is going to be required to go if we're ever going to get our hands wrapped around really just the cost of it and the burden of it, right? Not just like the outlay financially, not that kind of a cost, but just the overall burden of it. So if we're ever going to do that, both as professionals or for the clients that we serve, individuals, businesses, institutions, communities, like whatever, if we're ever going to do that, we're going to have to get kind of good at that. But there is a point, I think, where a good operating system can go too far when we start talking about optimization and when you get close to it. And so it would be sort of foolish to go into system building, even if you're building it just locally within your own practice, kind of building a process that kind of leads up to multiple processes that eventually give you an output that you want, like maybe a happy customer. But if you kind of only put your time into that, you can get to the other side and get too far. And this relates a lot to population health because that's ultimately what we're trying to do, right? We're ultimately trying to look at a group of folks, and let's assume that's, let's kind of keep it low level on the social ecological framework and think of that as the group of folks we're managing is our historical clients in the clinic, right? So we've got, 100 people, let's say, who we've kind of had a role in managing their health, and so they're in our population. So that's a market, whatever you want to call that, that's a population. And we want to optimize that somehow. We want them to visit us when they need to. We want to get them in quickly. We want them to be happy and satisfied. We want to get the result we need. There's a lot of things in there. And so optimizing that makes sense, right? So the classic scenario is, no one likes sitting in the doctor's waiting room forever. That's certainly not an optimized process, at least not if you care about the client. But there is a point where that can get a little bit crazy. And so I wanted to just sort of kind of paint some pictures and get us thinking a little bit. And then hopefully get us applying, which of course, is my big kind of push. My whole point of this is you can know this stuff, you can appreciate it, but if you're not applying it and getting good at it, you're not really doing yourself any favors. So the first is, let's think of kind of a system we can all appreciate, right? And one that, although we appreciate it, we don't always practice with it. And that is what some people call the body mind, right? And it sounds kind of kooky and, maybe like alternative, right? Oh, mind, body, and all this. But if you really stop and think about it, in many ways, that's where, as a world of, as a society of conservative care professionals, that's where we're trying to go. We're trying to get ourselves and everyone around us to appreciate the fact that we cannot separate. There's an interconnectedness between the body and the mind, right? Not just the brain. And although I hear a lot about brain science and neuroscience, it's more than that. It's not just the brain. It's not just the physical structure and sort of the electrical system that we know to be the brain and nervous system. It's actually the mind itself. It's things like thoughts, right? My beliefs, my thoughts, and how that impacts everything. And that we can't separate that. And in many ways, that's where we see sort of biopsychosocial thinking going, right? Like we sort of understand that. And certainly one avenue within that thinking is pain and pain-related science, right? So we see it and we're excited about it, as we should be. But what that really is it's kind of a tip of the cap to the idea that you can't separate this thing, right? Like you can't silo it out. You can't say, oh, well, the properties of the mind, that belongs in the realm of psychology, and the properties of the body belong somewhere in the physiology and medical science. Like, no, it's one thing and it all connects and it's interconnected. Meaning that my thoughts definitely influence my physiology. Like it's not just like a fluffy thing. It's a definite biological cascade that we can reproduce. And we can go the other way, that it's interconnected, that my body absolutely impacts my thinking. My experience of the world, right? In many ways, you have heard me say many times, movement is a window into future health. So think about the cumulative experience of someone who isn't moving freely throughout their environment, right? Who is somehow encumbered or restricted, and what that's going to do to their thinking over time. So we know that it's interconnected. So that's a system that we can all appreciate, but it's one that we have to really push to continue to get good at understanding and sort of integrating, because it's not easy. And we could go there and we could say, well, let's think about the interconnectedness of that. Let's think about how my thoughts, and if I perceive threat, can create an entire cascade of inflammation, right? Like I can create a biological cascade of things. And that's sort of when we stop and think about it, we remember that. But in many ways, in the moment, we kind of still are looking at the piece. Okay, so that's systems thinking. Now let's think about an optimized system. Now let's get away from biology and let's think something that's much more easy to think about. And what got me thinking about this was my travel this weekend. So my travel this weekend was down to DC. I had to do some stuff for the APTA nominating committee, which I'm a member of, and we kind of get together once a year to spend time really hammering out who the slate of leaders will be. And I will tell you, if you're an APTA member, I think we did a good job, and you've got some tough choices ahead of you. But that system, me doing that work relies on the transportation system. Now, to go from New Jersey to DC is not a huge distance, right? Like it's a couple hours by car, like maybe 3 to 5 hours by car, and by train it's maybe 3 hours, and by flight it's an hour. And I've always done it driving. Like that's just my preference. I tend to like to drive because I like the control over my own situation. Like if I want to leave at this time, I leave at this time. I don't have to worry about anything else, right? And so I've done that a few times. But to be fair, I'm usually kind of like exhausted, and there's traffic, and it's a hectic thing. It's kind of stressful. So I've taken the train a few times. That's worked out pretty well for the most part, but it's not great because honestly, like it's a little bit longer, and although they say there's Wi-Fi, it's kind of sketchy, and I can't get the work done that I think I'm going to get done. And so it's like, the experience is okay. So this time I said, I'm going to fly. Okay? And there seems to be something with me and flights. I don't know. I think I've got some kind of like travel, issue. Like I sort of like, create problems wherever I go somehow. Not meaningfully, but every flight I'm ever on gets canceled, delayed, or something. So I sort of like said, well, how bad could it be? I'm going from Newark to DC. It's 38 minutes in the air. Like, how bad could this be? Well, what this was a perfect example of a well-optimized system that's kind of saturated, right? So if you flew yesterday at all, it was not good. There were some weather issues. And there were a lot of delays. I got home at midnight. My flight was at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right? I should have been home by 6 o'clock, should have been home to eat dinner with my kids. But instead, what I did was sat there until almost midnight. Why? Because some fog rolled in. And the fog rolled in, and that threw some things off. And this is such an optimized system, such a complex system that's so well optimized that a little bit of a ripple, enough, could throw the whole thing off. That is ultimately what Nicholas Nassim Taleb talks about in fragility. Right? Like, these systems, the more you pack into it, the more fragile it gets, because even the slightest perturbation on the system is enough to knock it off. And once you knock it off, it's like, man, it becomes exponentially worse. So what that does is it forces us to think about ourselves. What we've tried to do in many ways as conservative care professionals is we've pushed the margins very hard. We've maximized time. We've crammed as much as we can into our evaluations. We've spent more and more time cramming more and more in, to the point, and of course at a not a huge expense, so not a lot of profit margin on the flip side. And so because of that, we're pushed to the limits of what we can handle, of all of the variables that we as a system can handle. And so why is that a problem? Because we are now fragile. Because we're a fragile system. Right? And you can see this in the biology, okay, of the provider, certainly burnout rates. You can see it in society. Like, it's not just healthcare, it's everywhere. We've pushed ourselves to such a fragile state that we're now seeing terrible, terrible outcomes because some perturbations on the system. Right? I mean, it doesn't take long for you to dive into the story that came out last week, okay? It doesn't take long to see that we're seeing the results of fragility in many ways. Okay? I mean, when you look at depression, anxiety, addiction, suicide, and the fact that that's changing the trajectory of lifespan in the United States, that we are 3 years in a row down, it has to make you start thinking about, like, why? Why is this? Now, I'm going to tell you, I really believe in that idea of despair. Like, as a society, we're pushed so much to the fringe. We're so frazzled. We're so kind of like at the edge of our capacity that even a small perturbation knocks us completely off. And when you get knocked completely off, bad things tend to happen. You wait until midnight to get home, right? So that idea, that stress-distress threshold, that concept of we've built our lives, we've been working so hard to optimize everything, that what we've really done is cram more in than we can possibly handle. And so because of that, even the slightest little wrinkles throw us off. So then it gets us into, okay, so how do we fix it? And this is kind of the difference between standardization and conformity. And I use those words, I mean, in many ways, standards allow you to conform if we have a standard. Now, one of the standards I think is a good standard, right? Like highways with lanes. Like, that's a good standard, right? Like, I mean, in general, you sort of know the dotted lines means stay within the lanes and, like, travel. But it doesn't dictate your conformity, right? If you want to switch lanes, you can, okay? Like, so this whole idea of, like, stay within your lanes, like, you don't have to. Just don't take up 2 lanes. There's a standard. You go with 1 lane at a time, right? But it still allows us to go from point A to point B in a predictable manner. It's not just like, hey, we know that there's, sort of dirt roads anywhere and go wherever you want to take your car. It's, in general, there's a way to go about this from point A to point B, and there are sort of guidelines that keep you, safe and healthy, but you can kind of do your own thing. So that becomes something that we should strive for. Standards. Like, we need standards. Now, of course, in the APHPT world, I couldn't be more excited that APHPT as an organization has sort of adopted the proactivity standards, right? Move, fuel, recover, endure, connect. That those are the ways to achieve health. That if we do this correctly, if we kind of build on that platform, we can pull off health. We can get the output of health. And that really it becomes about building some way of kind of getting those standards and making it easy, removing barriers. Making it easy to achieve that standard, but not necessarily conform. Which gets me to my next point, and I only got 2 minutes, so I'm going to jump into it. Seth Godin talks about the purple cow. That's probably one of his most famous, contributions. The idea of the purple cow, somebody who stands out in a scenario, in a situation. And I love that idea. And what he's basically saying there is, listen, like, conformity is boring. It's bland. You need to stand out. There has to be something that draws attention to you. That you can still work on the same standards, but you can still do it with your own style. You can put on top of that discipline that comes with being standardized, that allows you to create something that's measurable over time, that allows you to create something that's consistent for the user. Like, that's awesome. Those are standards. But that's not conformity. Because conformity means everyone has to do it exactly the same way, which I think is something I'm completely against, right? Like, you have to be able to put your stylistic pieces on it and know your own place in the world. Now, I just want to sort of finish. I'll draw some attention to it. And I saw Aaron, jumped on there and popped up. But I'm going to give him a huge hat tip on this. Like, if you haven't seen, on the Facebook, page, if you haven't seen it, it's been shared a bunch of times. But yesterday, they published a little video that Aaron did in essentially my hometown. Did what he does. He added his creativity on top of a concept, right? So the standard is aerobic fitness. We know cardiorespiratory fitness changes health. In proactivity world, we call that move. He's spending some time with us, so he's sort of ingrained in those standards, having to figure out how to put his stylistic piece on top of those standards. Now, if he had come in and said, yeah, I think move is stupid, I'm not going to do that, it wouldn't have worked, right? It was no, that's our standard. That's how we roll. However, you can put your stylistic piece on top of that. And so he does this great rap for a little race that we're doing, and it's a way that we think, hey, makes health happen, where people are in a fun way, right? But still stylistically fresh and different. There's my clock, so I'll wrap it up. Bottom line is this. That idea of kind of saying, hey, build a platform, build a standard that you can consistently deliver. That's systems level thinking. And yes, making that system good and quality and robust is important, but also leaving it anti-fragile is probably the most important, right? Not pushing the golden goose, your system, not pushing it to its absolute limits. And that system could be your own health. That system could be your own biology. That system could be your family. That system could be the way you work. That system could be the way that you deliver services in your community. Like, whatever. We all work with systems. But this idea of pushing the system, but also making sure it stays strong by not taking it too far down that optimization curve, right? By making sure that it still has some room to explore and grow and bolt new things onto it and benefit from the purple cow. I think that's really, really critical. And I think that's really where we're all trying to get to in this world of population health. Manage a population, learn the framework, learn the standard. I'll just leave it this way. Last night, because of the traffic snafus in the air and the fog, I had to cancel my final unit with this cohort of the APHPT Cert course, which absolutely killed me. Now we'll push it off a couple days and we'll do it, so it's not like we won't do it, but it knocked us off. So the fog had such an impact that it knocked us off of our ability to do what we wanted to do. Now, the beauty of it is I did get to watch a lot of the pitches, right? So if you don't know, I won't go into too much, but people put a final piece up as their final project. And I was able to watch it, and it was just so cool because to me, they are doing exactly what I'm talking about, right? They're taking the standard that we're setting out in the course, but they're putting their unique wrinkles on it. I mean, we heard everything from state troopers to pain science to school systems to employer space. I mean, there's a little bit of everything. And I love it. I love it because the point is that doesn't mean that everybody comes in and says, well, this is the way Mike does it, so that means it's the only way. No, absolutely not the case. What it says is this is the framework that has been successful in this particular domain. I'm going to put a little bit of my twist on it, and I'm going to take it into the community I want to serve. And that might be employers, that might be schools, that might be employer schools. Like there's a whole combination of things there. That is the beauty. That's how we move the needle on this thing. We know the principles need to get into the hands of the community. We know we need to make it something that can produce consistent results, a la system. We know there's a lot of factors that play in, and we know that we can push this thing to get much, much better results in a way that takes a lot less of us. It doesn't beat us up in the process. That's all wonderful. Okay. The next step then becomes do it in a way with some stylistic, sort of like input, some fun, that we ultimately get the result we want, better health, without crushing everything in the process, right? Like actually get the better health, maybe in a fun, different, purple cow kind of a way. All right, I'll leave it there. I'm over. So obviously, and I covered about half of what I wanted to cover. Maybe next week I'll do a part 2. But the truth of the matter is, we've got this thing. Like, it's coming around. It's awesome to watch. It's fun. This final cohort, of version 1 of the course has shown us that. If you want to learn more about this, if this is something that you feel like you need to dive into, what I will tell you is that's where we're taking it. That's where we're going, right? Like, the way of thinking is step 1, but we ultimately need to get to the point where we're tweaking our practice and we're building those systems. And we've got some exciting things coming down the pike. I don't have time to tell you about them. Maybe another time. Have a great Monday. It's only Monday. It's a good Monday. Monday in December. Holidays are around the corner. I hope you're enjoying yours if you're celebrating them already. Have a great Monday. Make it count.